Marriage, at least in my mind, meant partnership, two adults aligning goals, balancing responsibilities, and deciding together what the future should look like. That image shattered quietly, without argument or warning, on a random Wednesday evening. I came home expecting the usual routine: dinner, a conversation, maybe a movie. Instead, my wife stood in the kitchen holding a stack of papers, her expression unreadable. She didn't greet me, kiss me, or ask about my day. She simply placed the documents on the counter and said, "We need to finalize the weekend arrangements." The word arrangements confused me. We had no plans, no trips booked, no commitments marked on our shared calendar. I skimmed the first page, expecting dates for a family gathering or a charity event, activities she often volunteered me for without asking. But what I saw made my mouth go dry. It wasn't an invitation. It was a schedule, a meticulously organized timetable spanning Friday evening through late Sunday night. Every hour was allocated to tasks labeled monitoring, feeding, and activity coordination. The subject of these tasks? Her sister's 3 children. Before I could process it, she spoke with a tone that suggested the decision had been made long ago. "They'll be here every weekend. You're better with kids, and my sister needs help." She pushed a fountain pen, gold-trimmed, engraved with her initials, across the marble countertop like a ceremonial weapon. "Sign here," she instructed, tapping a blank line at the bottom. "It's family." I laughed instinctively, assuming sarcasm, but her eyes didn't soften. In that moment, I understood something chilling. Expectations were not suggestions in my marriage. They were obligations. My signature wasn't consent. It was compliance. Before I could protest, the front doorbell chimed. My wife glanced at her watch, satisfied. "They're early." Perfect. A wave of shrieks and footsteps burst into the house before the door even closed. The children, aged somewhere between chaos and disaster, stormed in like released captives. One hurled a backpack at the staircase, another poked our dog with a stick, and the youngest threw herself onto the living room rug, screaming as though gravity personally offended her. Their mother appeared behind them, all smiles and exhaustion. She carried no diaper bag, no spare clothes, no instructions, just a designer purse and the air of someone dropping off luggage at a hotel. She hugged my wife briefly, waved at me without eye contact, and darted off before I could form a single sentence. Within minutes, my home transformed from a sanctuary into a battlefield. Juice spilled onto the couch, toys flew across the hallway, and arguments erupted over objects I didn't even own. My wife watched, arms crossed, like a supervisor ensuring a new employee understood his place. "They love being here," she said casually, as if that justified everything. By the time I fed them dinner, after negotiating like a hostage negotiator with the oldest over broccoli, they had destroyed more items than I could count. Bedtime was war. The youngest refused to sleep unless every light remained on. The middle child insisted on brushing his teeth with ketchup. The oldest demanded to watch horror movies at full volume. None of these requests were allowed, yet enforcing boundaries only made me the villain. Sunday night arrived like a rescue helicopter I couldn't board. Their mother returned, praising her own freedom-filled weekend while ignoring the wreckage in my living room. The children hugged her as if she were a hero returning from battle, though I was the one bleeding sanity. When they finally left, silence didn't comfort me. It accused me. I hadn't signed the paper, but somehow I had already been drafted. I wasn't exhausted. I was trapped. And the terrifying part wasn't what had happened. It was knowing this was only the beginning. If the first weekend had felt like a warning, the second confirmed something far worse. These children didn't stumble into bad behavior. They engineered it. Their actions weren't random bursts of energy. They were coordinated assaults on order itself. The oldest, a boy with a constant smirk and the confidence of a dictator, climbed onto the dining table wearing a towel as a cape and declared himself king of the house. He pounded his fists, issued imaginary decrees, and demanded that everyone bow to him. When I asked him to step down, he stared at me as though I were an inconvenience intruding on his kingdom. He didn't fear consequences because, in his world, there had never been any. The middle child, who seemed harmless at first, prove himself the tactician of destruction. He moved silently, observing rooms like an inspector looking for structural weaknesses. Then, without hesitation, he would pour cereal onto rugs, smear chocolate on cabinet doors, or dump puzzle pieces into the fireplace. Not out of curiosity, but out of calculation. He didn't do these things with excitement. He did them with precision. When I confronted him, he blinked as if the problem wasn't his behavior, but my confusion. The youngest, no more than 5, weaponized noise. Anytime I instructed her to sit, eat, or even breathe calmly, she unleashed a scream that rattled the windows. It wasn't crying. It was a siren, long, sharp, unapologetic. She didn't scream because she was upset. She screamed because someone, somewhere, denied her a whim. If she wanted a cookie before dinner, and I said no, she collapsed onto the floor like a professional performer who specialized in public meltdowns. Each child operated differently, yet their chaos blended seamlessly into a relentless storm. By Saturday afternoon, I felt less like a host and more like an air traffic controller navigating 3 planes determined to crash simultaneously. My wife, meanwhile, sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, barely lifting her gaze as the children used our furniture as trampolines. When I finally expressed my frustration, she offered a sentence that stunned me with its simplicity and ignorance. They're just spirited. To her, their behavior wasn't a problem. It was personality. Energy, creativity, uniqueness. She believed discipline stifled growth, and she spoke about boundaries the way some people spoke about diet fads, unnecessary and outdated. She wasn't raising children. She was releasing variables into the world and hoping they'd magically assemble into responsible adults. The problem was that the children already knew the formula of their universe. Bad behavior came without consequences. No warning. No correction. No accountability. They had learned early that actions, no matter how disruptive, were not only tolerated, they were celebrated. Sunday arrived with the kind of exhaustion reserved for disaster survivors. When her mother came to pick them up, she didn't inspect the damage in my home. She didn't ask if they listened. She didn't thank me. Instead, she dropped to her knees, embraced each child like a soldier returning from war, and said, "Did you have fun? Tell me everything." They recounted their weekend as if they'd conquered a foreign land. She applauded their stories, not noticing, or refusing to notice, that every anecdote was an admission of destruction. Not once did she ask how their behavior affected anyone else. In her world, the children were perfect, and anyone who questioned them was the villain. That moment clarified the real issue. It wasn't that the children were out of control. It was that I was the only adult expected to be controlled. My weekends didn't just feel occupied, they felt conscripted. And as they drove away, I realized something unsettling. The kids didn't lack rules. They had rules, just none that applied to them. It happened gradually, like rust eating through metal, silent, unnoticed at first, unstoppable once discovered. The first few weekends felt like inconveniences, temporary disruptions I believed would pass, once everyone realized how unreasonable the arrangement was. Yet each Friday evening, without fail, those children arrived at my door like weekly deliveries, and every hope I had of reclaiming my time dissolved. Saturdays were the first to disappear. In the past, they held meaning: coffee with friends, errands done at my pace, small joys like walking to the hardware store imagining projects I might start. Eventually, those rituals were replaced by negotiating breakfast demands from 3 unpredictable forces. My mornings became battles over cereal, cartoon channels, and who sat where. I no longer woke up thinking about what I wanted to do. I woke up wondering what they would destroy next. Sundays followed, claimed as collateral damage. Once, Sundays meant church visits, quiet drives, or fishing with old college friends who still believed weekends were for rest. Texts started rolling in. "Are you coming? We saved you a seat." Then, slowly, the invitation stopped. They stopped because I stopped answering. Not out of rudeness, but out of shame. I couldn't admit to grown men that I was being held hostage by children who didn't share my last name. I was too embarrassed to explain that my marriage had turned into unpaid labor. Meanwhile, my wife treated these weekends like spa vouchers. Every Saturday morning, She dressed elegantly, sprayed perfume like armor, and walked out the door without hesitation. She never looked back, never checked whether I needed help, never asked if I agreed. By noon, she was sitting at rooftop restaurants or boutique cafes with her sister and their friends. When the conversation turned to family responsibilities, my name floated around the table like currency. They didn't see me as a partner. They saw a service provider. One afternoon, a friend bumped into her at a brunch and later sent me a message. She called you the reliable one. Said she doesn't know what they'd do without you. There was no pride in his tone, only confusion. He knew reliability was admirable when voluntary, but when enforced, it becomes a cage. Tasks once optional became obligations stamped into my identity. I couldn't remember the last time I chose anything. Even my hobbies faded. My fishing gear gathered dust. My video game console became an artifact. The gym membership I paid for monthly became a silent reminder of the person I had been before marriage reordered my life. The worst part wasn't the children. They were symptoms, not the illness. The real disease was expectation, silent, heavy, and unyielding. No one ever said I had to do this. No one thanked me. No one acknowledged the sacrifice. The absence of recognition was louder than words. It screamed a message I had never heard so clearly. My time belonged to everyone but me. One Sunday evening, as the kids left and the house finally stood still, I sat in my chair and tried to recall the last moment I felt like myself. I couldn't. My reflection in the darkened TV screen looked like a man who existed between tasks, a placeholder instead of a person. My marriage hadn't taken my freedom overnight. It had taken it hour by hour, weekend by weekend, until I forgot I once had a life outside obligations. It wasn't just leisure I had lost. It wasn't hobbies, friends, or invitations. It was something far more painful and far more dangerous. I was losing identity, one weekend at a time. The first time my wife's sister entered our home, I thought we were hosting royalty. She didn't walk in. She glided, trailing expensive perfume and entitlement like a private entourage. Her heels clicked on the tiles, as if announcing her arrival to invisible cameras, and her smile radiated the confidence of someone who never faced consequences. Designer handbags dangled from her arms, one for makeup, another for nothing at all, and a third just because. She wore luxury like armor, each piece screaming, "I don't do ordinary." Her nails looked as if they belonged to someone who had never lifted anything heavier than a credit card. She talked about her trips, Dubai for shopping, Paris for relaxation, Bali for spiritual reset. And somehow, despite her globe-trotting lifestyle, she was too tired to raise her children. Every complaint from her lips sounded rehearsed, as though motherhood had been thrust upon her by a cruel universe rather than created through choices she made willingly. She dropped the children off like packages with inconvenient return policies, squeeze my arm with a flirtatious wink, and whisper, "You're so good at this. It's natural for you." Then she'd vanish before I could respond, as if the act of parenting her children drained her battery more than the 5-hour brunch she'd just returned from. She never lingered long enough to notice the cereal smeared on the walls or the Lego mines scattered across the living room. In her world, my home wasn't a place, it was a service center. What unsettled me wasn't her negligence. It was the admiration she received for it. My wife treated her like a celebrity, an icon of success and independence. Whenever her sister spoke, everyone listened. Whenever she sighed, someone rushed to comfort her. My wife defended her choices with unsettling fervor, praising her hustle and lifestyle balance, ignoring that the balance leaned entirely on her shoulders. One Saturday, as she lounged on our couch, scrolling through photos from her latest beach trip, she casually mentioned hiring a personal assistant to manage her schedule. My wife gasped with admiration, declaring it proof of how in demand she was. Meanwhile, I struggled to convince the children not to feed toothpaste to the dog. I wasn't in demand. I was in service. Every time she arrived, she radiated a superiority that made my existence feel small. Her words were dipped in sugar, but delivered like commands. "Take care of them for a bit," she'd say, brushing her hair as if granting me the privilege of unpaid employment. She never brought snacks, clothes, or plans. She brought expectations and left responsibility behind like forgotten luggage. One evening, while she and my wife laughed over champagne in our dining room, I overheard her say, "Some men are born to lead, others are born dependable." The table erupted in laughter. I stood in the hallway, holding a broken toy, and wondered when dependability became a cage. I started noticing patterns. My wife never questioned her sister's decisions, never saw the burden placed on our weekends, never acknowledged the imbalance. It wasn't coincidence, it was conditioning. Each compliment she offered me, each time she thanked me for being so patient, wasn't appreciation. It was reinforcement. I wasn't being helped into fatherhood. I was being groomed into servitude. The truth hit me during a Sunday drop-off. She arrived, barely knocking, tossed her keys into my hand as though I were valet, and said, "You're such a blessing. My friends are jealous I have someone like you." My wife beamed with pride. I stood there, frozen. In that moment, I understood something unsettling. I wasn't part of the family. I was the family solution to a problem they refused to acknowledge. And solutions don't get rest. They get used. There is a moment in every burdened man's life when tolerance snaps, not loudly, but quietly, like a rope frayed for years finally giving way. That Saturday morning, I woke up with the same knot in my stomach I always felt before the children arrived. But something inside me had changed. I wasn't afraid of another weekend. I was exhausted by the idea of surviving without boundaries. If no one else was willing to parent, then I would. And parents, unlike spectators, set rules. Before the chaos even hit the doorstep, I sat at the dining table and wrote a list, 10 firm, non-negotiable rules. They weren't military commands. They were basic guidelines every functioning household follows. No shouting inside. Snacks only at the table. Toys returned to baskets. No jumping on furniture. Hands washed before meals, and a mandatory quiet hour after lunch. I added chores, not labor, but responsibilities. Simple things like sorting toys, wiping spills, carrying their plates to the sink. I even designated a reflection corner, not a punishment zone, but a space for timeouts where a child could calm down without turning the house into an arena. When they arrived, the oldest boy immediately climbed onto a chair, ready to announce another kingdom proclamation. I stopped him, not by yelling, but by standing eye level and pointing to the first rule. No jumping or standing on furniture. He blinked, confused, as though encountering a foreign concept. Then, shockingly, he stepped down. The middle child tested the system next. He tried pouring cereal on the couch, confident it would go unchallenged. But I guided his hand toward the kitchen table, handed him a placemat, and made him pour the cereal properly. He looked offended, as if civility was an insult. Still, he complied, though reluctantly. The youngest, always quick to deploy her screams, tried her usual tactic when I asked her to sit for breakfast. She opened her mouth, ready to unleash a siren, but instead, I pointed to a laminated reward chart taped to the fridge. If she sat, she earned a sticker. Enough stickers meant she chose Saturday's evening activity. She hesitated, torn between instinct and incentive. Then, unbelievably, she sat. By noon, something miraculous happened. The house remained intact. No spills on the sofa, no crushed crackers in the carpet, no furniture repurposed as a jungle gym. The air felt different. It held order, calmness, dignity. The children weren't angels, but they were manageable. Structure, it turned out, wasn't oppression, it was clarity. But peace in dysfunctional families is never applauded. When their mother arrived, she expected the usual war zone. The chaos she considered proof of children being creative. Instead, she found discipline. She found respect. She found 3 children describing their day in dramatic tones, painting me as a dictator who had stripped them of all joy. They complained about chores as if I had forced them to mine diamonds, about quiet time as though it were solitary confinement. She gasped, hand over her heart, as though I had committed acts of cruelty. My wife stood behind her, eyebrow raised, eyes sharp, not impressed, not grateful, but suspicious. "Why are you trying to control them?" she asked, tone trembling with something between accusation and disbelief. My answer wasn't a scream. It wasn't anger. It was a truth spoken so plainly it surprised even me, because no one else is. The room froze. For a moment, silence felt heavier than the children ever had. But the conversation didn't end there. It shifted, not toward gratitude, but hostility. I wasn't praised for creating order. I was punished for disrupting a system where dysfunction benefited everyone else, but me. Rules weren't the enemy. Obedience was. Somewhere along the line, I had accepted every responsibility handed to me without question. I was the only adult expected to obey. That was the day I understood they didn't fear chaos. They feared losing control over me. Money has a quiet way of revealing truth. It doesn't shout, it doesn't negotiate, it simply exposes priorities. For months, I believed the only cost of babysitting my wife's sister's children was my time. I was wrong. The real bill arrived slowly, disguised as convenience, kindness, and necessity, until it became undeniable. It started innocently enough. The kids arrived hungry every Friday evening, despite living 15 minutes away and supposedly having dinner before being dropped off. I bought snacks the first weekend because it felt polite. By the fourth, politeness had evolved into obligation. Cereal, juice boxes, cookies, fruit rolls. My pantry became a miniature grocery store designed solely for them. They didn't just eat my food, they devoured it as though they were preparing for hibernation. Next came the toys. Their mother insisted they forgot things at home every single weekend. To prevent tantrums, I purchased coloring books, puzzles, and building blocks. But toys didn't satisfy them for long. They wanted newer things, the kind every commercial convinces children they must have. Action figures, dolls, remote-controlled cars, plastic kitchens. I told myself it's only once. But once became routine, and routine became expectation. Then came the accidents. My living room rug suffered grape juice, stains impossible to remove. A vase my late grandmother gifted me shattered during a sword fight using broomsticks. The dog's bed was ripped apart in a competition to see what stuffing looks like. Every incident had a justification, and every justification circled back to me, because apparently maintaining the house was my responsibility. One Saturday afternoon, the oldest child used permanent marker on the wall, spelling his name like a graffiti artist marking territory. When confronted, he shrugged. Mommy says walls can be painted anytime. Paint costs money. Repairing furniture costs money. Replacing electronics costs even more. And those costs fell into one place consistently, my debit card. The numbers began accumulating faster than the children's demands. What once appeared as harmless expenses transformed into financial red flags. Snacks alone totaled nearly what I used to spend on weekend outings with friends. The cost of toys surpassed my monthly gym membership. Replacing damaged items devoured the emergency fund I had spent years building. Finally, I sat down at my desk one night, exhausted and curious about how much this new lifestyle had stolen from me. I opened my bank statements. My stomach tightened. $2,318. That was the amount drained in less than 8 weekends, not counting utilities, meals, and fuel. I marched to my wife, holding the printout. "We need to talk about this," I said, voice steady but brittle. She barely glanced at the paper. "You're the one who buys things," she replied, as if logic had somehow eliminated her involvement. Her tone wasn't dismissive. It was indifferent. I realized then that this was never accidental. The system she and her sister built relied on me being generous, compliant, and ignorant. I wasn't doing nice things for the kids. I was subsidizing someone else's lifestyle. The financial imbalance became clearer every weekend. While I covered snacks and damages, my wife and her sister enjoyed brunches featuring avocado, toast priced like jewelry. They posed for photos, ordered champagne, and returned home with shopping bags worth more than my monthly mortgage payment. They lived freely because someone, me, absorbed responsibilities they refused to acknowledge. This wasn't babysitting. Babysitting ends when the clock stops. Babysitting implies compensation. Babysitting has boundaries. This was unpaid parenting, without agreement, authority, or respect. That night, staring at the spreadsheet of expenses, I understood something unsettling. The children weren't the financial burden. The adults were, and I was paying for all of them. Family dinners in my wife's household were never simple meals. They were showcases, platforms for status updates, vacations recaps, and subtle comparisons disguised as compliments. I used to attend them with a sense of duty, but over time, I learned to predict the script. Her sister boasting about her luxurious escapades, her mother praising the strength of independent women, and my wife quietly inserting my name as evidence of her own efficiency. I was never the star of these gatherings. I was the supporting character providing convenience. On that particular evening, the mood was lighter than usual. The dining room was decorated with gold accents. Candles flickered along the polished wooden table, and laughter floated through the air like perfume. Silverware clinked against plates filled with food I hadn't tasted in months, because my weekends were spent microwaving chicken nuggets for children who treated meals like battlegrounds. Everyone seemed excited, almost celebratory. I didn't know why, until dessert was served. As the plates of cheesecake arrived, her sister raised her glass with the confidence of someone accustomed to applause. She didn't thank anyone for the meal. She didn't toast to family unity. Instead, she flashed a grin at the table and announced, loud enough for every fork to pause midair, "Thank God for this arrangement. I can finally enjoy my weekends without guilt." In that moment, something inside me snapped, not angrily, but with the sharpness of truth cutting through fog. The room erupted in cheers, laughter, nods of approval. Her mother dabbed her eyes like the announcement was a testament to divine grace. My father-in-law chuckled and added, "Every family needs a reliable man." My name wasn't mentioned, yet somehow the title clung to me like a collar. Then it happened. My wife leaned in, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "You make all this possible," as if I were some kind of benevolent institution, not a human being with limitations, dreams, and boundaries. The kiss didn't feel affectionate. It felt ceremonial, something you give a mascot before sending him back to perform. Not one person at that beautifully decorated table asked how I felt. Not a single family member looked at me with concern or curiosity. No one said, "Is this okay for you?" or "Do you need help?" My existence wasn't considered. My comfort wasn't factored in. I wasn't a person. They saw me as a solution. It was a stunning realization, not because it was sudden, but because everything leading up to that moment now made perfect sense. The ignored complaints, the shrugged shoulders, the unquestioned schedule, the casual dismissal of my time and finances, none of it was accidental. It was a system built on one assumption: I would always say yes. But on that night, for the first time, I understood what I truly was in their eyes. Not appreciated, not respected, not valued. I was useful. I pushed my plate away, unable to swallow another bite. The laughter continued, but it no longer sounded like joy. It sounded like teeth grinding metal. I looked around the table and saw not relatives, but shareholders benefiting from labor they never acknowledged. My presence gave them freedom, yet my silence made them believe it was owed. The ride home was quiet. My wife chatted about how proud she was of her family and how lucky we were. I didn't respond. I stared out the window, watching streetlights flicker past like checkpoints of a life I never agreed to. That night, lying awake, the truth settled into my bones like cold air. I wasn't appreciated. I was exploited. And exploitation, once seen clearly, can never be unseen. The knock on the door came at the usual time, Friday, 6:03 p.m. The same three knocks I had come to associate with the end of my freedom and the beginning of chaos. Normally, I would have taken a deep breath, straightened my back, and prepared myself for the routine. But not this time. I didn't move. I didn't reach for the handle. I simply stared at the door and felt something unexpected rise inside me. A calm certainty. My phone buzzed. It was my wife. "They're here. Open the door." I typed slowly, hands steady, heart strangely still. "No children this weekend. We need to talk." Her reply came in less than 8 seconds. Each word sharp enough to draw blood. "You don't get to decide." But I did. And for the first time in months, I acted like it. The knocking turned into pounding. The oldest child yelled my name like a command. Their mother's voice joined the chorus, dripping with entitlement, disbelief, and offense, as though my closed door violated some sacred tradition. My wife sent more texts, blaming, accusing, escalating, but I muted the notifications and sat down on the couch, breathing deeply. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was oxygen. It was mine. Eventually, their footsteps retreated down the porch. Engine started. Door slammed. Tires screeched. Then stillness. A quiet I hadn't experienced in months settled over the house like a warm blanket. It didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like recovery. My wife burst through the door minutes later, fury radiating from her like heat. She didn't ask why. She didn't sit. She attacked. "What's wrong with you?" "They're children." I stood up and met her eyes, not aggressively, but with the clarity of someone who finally recognized his reality. "They're not my responsibility," I said. "Not my bills. Not my weekends. Not my job." She scoffed. "You're dramatic. This is family. You help family." "No, only. Family doesn't assign unpaid labor and call it love." Her face flickered, confusion, anger, disbelief. She wasn't used to resistance. She was used to my silence. When she stormed out to call her sister, I remained in the living room. I didn't pace. I didn't justify myself. I let her words float past me because something had changed. I finally saw what my compliance had built. A dependency not on my kindness, but on my absence of boundaries. The house, for the first time in months, stayed still. No screaming. No spillchus. No broken objects. No interruptions. The echo of my own breathing felt foreign, yet comforting, like reacquainting myself with a version of me I had abandoned. Hours later, she returned. Her tone had shifted, not softer but strategic. "You embarrassed me. You embarrassed my sister. They were counting on you." That sentence revealed more than she intended. It didn't mention the children's needs. It didn't mention my well-being. It exposed the truth. I was never part of the plan. I was the plan. I sat down and invited her to do the same. I spoke slowly, not in anger, but certainty. "I'm done being a resource. I am your husband, not your babysitter. If your sister needs help, she can hire someone. If these weekends continue, this marriage won't." The words hung in the air like a suspended verdict. She didn't answer, not immediately. Silence finally took the space that chaos once occupied. That night, I slept without waking up drenched in responsibility. The next morning, no one knocked. No children arrived. The house felt spacious, not physically, but spiritually. My coffee tasted different, like a decision made, not tolerated. For the first time in months, the weekend belonged to me. And once a man breathes freedom, even briefly, he never forgets what oxygen feels like. Sunday evenings used to be quiet, preparation for the week ahead, time to reset, maybe watch a show or sit in silence. But this one arrived like a summons. My wife had been distant since I refused to babysit, moving around the house with clipped movements and sighs that carried more accusation than words. I expected tension. I did not expect the ambush. At 7:14 p.m., the doorbell rang. My wife didn't look at me before opening it. She simply stepped aside as if ushering actors onto a stage. Her parents walked in first, stiff and formal, followed by her sister, arms folded, expression smug, and finally, two cousins who had no business being there but arrived anyway, eager for spectacle. The living room, once peaceful, transformed into a courtroom where the verdict was already written. My father-in-law cleared his throat, gesturing for me to sit. The tone wasn't a request. It was command disguised as courtesy. My wife positioned herself beside him, her expression calm, as though orchestrating something righteous rather than coercive. Her mother clutched a notebook, as if she had come prepared with evidence. "We're here because we're concerned," she began, eyes narrowed with rehearsed disappointment. "Your recent behavior has disrupted the family dynamic." Her sister wasted no time piling on. "You abandoned your responsibilities. You know how much I count on you. You made things difficult for everyone." Responsibilities? Difficult for everyone? I felt something inside me shift. Not anger, but clarity. The cousins chimed in next, parroting phrases that didn't belong to them, A man supports his family. Children need stability. You're part of a community. Every sentence felt like a brick being stacked around me. Constructing a cage they expected me to climb into willingly. My wife remained silent, letting them speak for her. She didn't look at me. She didn't mediate. She didn't acknowledge that her consent, not mine, had created this arrangement. She just watched, waiting for me to fold. I asked calmly, "Who told you I agreed to this?" Her mother scoffed. "We shouldn't have needed your agreement. We're family. We share the burden." There it was, the word that had been floating beneath every interaction, now naked and shameless. Burden. Not responsibility. Not cooperation. Not partnership. Burden. And I was the designated mule. They continued, voices overlapping, opinions masquerading as moral high ground. They accused me of being selfish, immature, ungrateful for the trust placed in me. They listed every instance I'd helped as though my past compliance was proof of permanent obligation. I waited for a pause, one breath between accusations, and when it came, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain my feelings. I simply asked, "Whose children are they?" Silence fell instantly, thick, uncomfortable, revealing. No one answered. Not her sister. Not her parents. Not the cousins. Not even my wife. Eyes darted. Mouths opened, then closed. The truth hovered, undeniable. The children belonged to one woman. Yet somehow responsibility had been transferred to me, stamped with expectations I never accepted. Their silence wasn't confusion. It was entitlement exposed. Her sister finally muttered, "We thought you didn't mind." Mind? I had been drowning for months, and not one person had asked whether I could swim. I leaned back in my chair, no longer feeling cornered. Their intervention had backfired. Not because they failed to pressure me, but because, in trying, they revealed the architecture of their dependency. This wasn't family unity. It was collective convenience. Her father tried salvaging control. This is about community values. I shook my head. Community isn't when one person sacrifices and everyone else benefits. That's not community. That's exploitation. The words echoed. No one countered them. No prepared speech, no accusation, no justification. Eventually, they left. Not with triumph, but with a heaviness they didn't expect to carry. My wife stayed behind, expression unreadable. Not angry, not apologetic, but shaken by something she had never considered. The moment a resource stops agreeing, it stops being a resource. And I had finally stopped. Clarity rarely arrives politely. It doesn't knock. It tears through the door when you least expect it. After the so-called intervention, something wouldn't let me sleep. Their certainty, their outrage, their collective insistence that I was obligated, it didn't feel emotional. It felt strategic. People don't fight that hard over something that doesn't benefit them. Something bigger was happening, something hidden. The next week, during a moment of uneasy quiet, I decided to trace the concrete details of this arrangement. I wasn't looking for drama. I was looking for facts. I dug through email threads, old text messages, even receipts. The deeper I went, the stronger the smell of manipulation became. Each message from her sister praised my dependability, as if rehearsing a line for an audience I hadn't met. Her phrasing repeated the same idea again and again. He's their second home. They're safe with him. He helps us every weekend. At first, it read like casual flattery. But flattery doesn't appear in legal paperwork. It began with a strange letter I found while checking our shared drawer, a school form for the oldest child. My name was listed under emergency contact, but not in the optional section, in the primary guardian slot. I stood there staring at the document, pulse pounding in my ears. Guardian? I had never signed anything. I never even agreed verbally. How had this happened? It didn't take long to find more. A daycare registration form showed my name again, this time as someone who regularly oversees the children on weekends. The language was confident, as if I had sat down and dictated the statement myself. Another document, this one related to extracurricular activities, listed me under the Children's Support Network, responsible for transportation and weekend supervision. The more I searched, the more my identity multiplied in places I had never been, attached to responsibilities I never accepted. My name wasn't an accident. It was a tool, a shield, a stamp of responsibility she could flash whenever anyone questioned where her children were. She wasn't overwhelmed. She was covered. This wasn't about family. It was about liability. My wife returned home that evening to find me surrounded by papers. She walked past me as if nothing was unusual, but I finally asked, "Why is my name on your sister's documents?" She froze, not in confusion, but in calculation. Her answer came slowly, as though she were searching for wording that softened the crime without admitting guilt. She needed help. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal. My identity had been repurposed into legal infrastructure without my knowledge. My name wasn't kindness anymore. It was documentation. I pressed further. My wife admitted, reluctantly, that her sister often used my name to prove stability, especially when dealing with schools, parenting groups, and organizations that expected responsible oversight. "She doesn't have anyone else," my wife whispered, her tone more annoyed than remorseful. "You make things easier." Easier. There was again the invisible currency I had been paying with, my existence. I realized something chilling. I wasn't the solution to childcare. I was the evidence of it. Her sister didn't need a babysitter. She needed a legal alibi. My presence gave her the illusion of motherhood without requiring her participation in it. Every weekend I complied. She built a reputation on my back. Responsible mother, hardworking woman, admirable single parent. But reputations borrowed eventually become debts owed. As I sat there, surrounded by documents bearing my name like fingerprints on a stolen object, the truth settled into place. I wasn't just being used. I was being registered, without consent, without compensation, without identity. It wasn't babysitting. It was identity theft with a smile. And I finally understood why they fought so hard to keep me silent. Once a lie has paperwork, it becomes a reality.